we go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Crucial Conversations. I am your co-host and the chair of the First Baptist Social Justice Ministry, the servant leader, I should say, of the First Baptist Social Justice Ministry. And here with me, as always,
Sherry, member of the First Baptist Church of Vienna Social Justice Ministry.
Rashina Drone, a resident millennial, also a member of the Social Justice Ministry and representative of the clergy.
And I'm Jaden Say, repping your favorite Aggie, repping Gen Z.
that's right, that's right. Yeah, again, so the topic of today's discussion, we're going to get into the threats to democracy, but kind of explore, try to dig into it a little bit more from like a specific angle of how essentially the replacement theory is shaping up that discussion, and like a lot of the fears from a lot of the white population, and how that is actually generating a lot of the pushback against democracy and ways to try to undermine our democracy. So we're going to get into that a little bit later. But as always, we like to start off by giving you guys a little update as to what are some of the issues and events that have been happening over the last couple of weeks. And starting off, just a couple of days ago, our own Governor Glenn Youngkin issued a new executive order that changed the way that returning citizens who've been convicted of felonies are able to vote. Over the previous administrations, the restoration of rights for returning citizens was fairly simple. They just either it happened automatically, that was challenged, and then it became a simple signature where the governors would just kind of go through and just do mass signings to allow a lot of returning citizens to be able to vote. It's a shame, first of all, that it even has to restore people's rights to vote. Feel like that should it seems unconstitutional that they even should lose that right in the first place. But that's where we are. But now with this new change by Governor Youngkin, it's now even more challenging because now people have to apply. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I personally feel like that's timely for the discussion we're having today. Right?
Yes.
I mean, it ties right into the attack on democracy. Yeah, and from what I saw when I read the article, that there are several entities that have to weigh in on the application. One being the Virginia State Police, the court system, and there's like several other individuals that have to sign off. So it's not just a simple apply, get it signed. It's this whole new process now. So I think this is going to be more and more difficult for people to get their voting rights restored in Virginia.
I agree with you 100%, Shireen. But it's very on brand, and I think that's a term I use a lot. But it's very on brand for this current governor, for the Republican Party. Right now, they are doing everything they can to try to sway votes on their behalf. Everything that is seemingly constitutional but doesn't feel constitutional, that they can do to try to keep the I'll say the majority of people who are mostly, I won't even say liberal. I think most people are pretty moderate in their views, but even people who are moderate are still feel like a threat to them. So yeah, it's very on brand, and I think it's really sad.
Yeah, and I think it definitely speaks to, we talk about all the time voting in every election, but it talks about like how important that is because we see how quickly Virginia flipped, and we are currently feeling the effects of that flip. And a lot of people think, oh, I'll vote presidential, but it's so much more than that because these are the people that are having the direct impact, as we see, on the lives of people in our communities. And this direct impact has not been good. We come on here every month and we have a different issue that we've investigated, and we can connect back to this current governmental system. And that's why it's so important that we engage in local politics, both at the county and the state level.
Agree. Guys, looks like we have Dee Dee, our newest member. She's in the studio, so we're going to bring her on as well. Good evening, Miss Carter.
Good evening, everyone. Good conversation. Yeah, I've been involved in a lot of stuff. I was on a redress committee this afternoon, and they were talking about stuff. But since you all are talking about politics, of course, you know, in the state of Virginia, we have election this year, and every delegate seat, every state house seat is up for grabs. So we need to make sure that people get out there and vote Democrat or independent or whatever. I know that our state senator is in a lot of trouble. I don't know if you know Chap Peterson, but he's my state representative, and we are trying to oust him. So that is very promising for us. So he's been in too long, and he considers himself a moderate, but he votes with Republicans. And this last vote that he made just did the job for me, and I think everyone else. So a lot of people I've been talking to are not happy with Chap Peterson. So I think this time he might as well say goodbye. This is his last hope.
While we are on that subject, let me go ahead and give our disclaimer. The views,
that's right. The views are the ones of
our own.
That's
They
right.
are our own. They do not represent First Baptist or
Exactly.
its constituency.
Exactly.
We are.
But that's why we all have opinions, and we voice our opinions. But yes, we need to get out there and vote very strongly to bring Virginia back into the Democratic hands in both the State House and for the House of Delegates.
Absolutely.
Because that's all the things that Governor Northam has enacted is now being regressed. And I'm very disappointed. I'm very disappointed. A lot of people didn't get out and vote this last election, and this guy got in. But also in the process, Terry McCullough was not the best candidate to run for office again. I was not happy that he was running for governor again. But you know, like you say, that's my opinion. I know it's not the views of the church or anything like that, but he should not have ran. And you know, this is what we get when you have the wrong people running for office.
Yeah.
Now we got to make sure we have the right people running for office. And then when Youngkin's trip is up, I think 2024 is when he can no longer run. We need to make sure we have the best candidate on the Democratic side that's running for office.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna try to keep rolling through these because we got a lot to talk about.
Okay, all right. I'll just listen.
The next issue that we wanted to highlight for everyone. So about a month or so ago, Mr. Timothy Johnson was killed by a member of the Fairfax police, and the video of that shooting was released just last week. Was it last week?
Yeah, it was last week.
So late last week. And as we suspected, it kind of confirmed all the things that we knew, that Mr. Johnson was unarmed at the time when he was killed, and he was accused of stealing some sunglasses from the mall in Tyson's. This is a travesty. One of the two officers that fired at Mr. Johnson was released, but seems like he was not charged with anything. I feel it's just really terrible and just really telling of just how every time that a Black man gets killed, the bar for criminal charges always seems to be raised. It seems like you kill an unarmed person who did not pose a threat to you, who was not attacking you, who was not attacking anyone else, who was not accused of attacking anyone else. That man should have his day in court, and he probably would have been issued a fine or maybe a couple of days in jail or something like this. No reason on earth why this man should not be going home to his family at some point. And it's just unexcusable, and it should have been. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about this, but it really sucks because a lot of times we do from this stuff from like oh, it's in Minnesota, or it's in Memphis, or it's in this place or that place, and when it happens here, like the outrage from our politicians, everything gets muted, everything gets kind of swept under the rug. But I think it's absolutely sickening that we have to be still going through this right here, right in our backyard.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. I told somebody very shortly after this happened, with the history of our current police chief and his history with violence toward the people. If I'm him and I have that history and I know this has been an issue that has been brought up, like, you're fired immediately. Minimally, the officers are fired. Like, you have to be fired, because this was something that we were already concerned about with him being at the head of the police department, and our worst fears have come to pass. And I don't have anything new necessarily to add to the discussion about police brutality and officer involved shootings. I think we've run that gamut several times, but in this particular situation, that other officer should not even. It shouldn't have taken this long for one officer to be fired, but I think they both should be fired, given the situation.
This is Didi. Is he actually fired? Because I was on the Zoom call, Zoom last night with the Fairfax County Black Caucus, and from my understanding that from Michelle Lee, that he is not fired. He's on administrative duty. He's on desk duty. Whoever it is on desk duty at this point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was the thing that I got angry about, because this guy is on desk duty like you. I thought he was fired too, but they told me no, he's on administrative leave. He's not actually terminated. They said he's not terminated, and he's on administrative, desk duty. So that's where that stands. And then this independent auditor. Oh yeah. Hold on.
Richard Schott. Well, while Dee's looking up that, yeah, I mean, so first of all, he definitely should have been fired. Immediately. And he should have been charged with something.
Yeah.
You can't just shoot people and unarmed people and get away with it. This sets a really dangerous precedent, and I think this is just in keeping with what we've been seeing up until now. In other shootings too, like the number of shootings that's happened in Fairfax County has risen sharply. It went from like 0 or 1 over a 5-6 year period. So now it's like 7 or 8. Just in the last year since we've had this new police chief. A lot of people have been calling for the chief's resignation or firing. That doesn't seem to be getting any traction. But that's no surprise, given that this board hired him when the public outcry and the public sentiment was sharply against his hiring to begin with. They've seemed pretty deaf to anything that we've been asking for. So.
Yeah, and we look at so often, you mentioned earlier, these incidents are far away from home, but when this strikes so close to home, I think it's important that we have to stand up and we have to make that noise and get that attention brought to the case, because the big thing is, like, this is not a national story. This is not even I don't even think people within the state know what's happening, let alone in the country. So I think it's about building that momentum and building that energy and organizing that movement so we can fight this and actually make change. Because as we've seen from when we were involved in or fighting against the hiring process to where we are today, our voices are so often not heard. So it's about making our voices heard. And if they don't want to hear us, we just have to get louder, because at the end of the day, we will be heard. So we just have to be able to get in that fight.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jaden. I personally don't feel it's enough attention on this situation, and just to the point of when we were against the guy getting hired, the chief, we also need to be just as vocal in the situation and not let it die down, because I feel like a lot of these times these things happen, it just quietly goes away, and then the next one happens, right? So definitely got to keep the pressure up on this one.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we're gonna continue to fight for Mr. Johnson. Moving on though, so the next issue that has been bubbling up over the last couple of days is Donald Trump's possible indictment. It was he went on Twitter, said he would be indicted last week. That didn't happen. And so now it's just a matter of, will he or won't he, or is the DA kind of succumbing to pressure? My personal opinion on this is that like nothing's gonna happen to him. Ain't nothing happened yet. Even the charges that he's being possibly indicted for, compared to like all the real serious crimes that he's done, including most prominently January 6th, like the thing that he's possibly going to be indicted for is, paying hush money to a prostitute. Really, like that's even more frustrating to me that's what they're going after him for, not the January 6th, coup attempt, so like I'm just frustrated by the whole thing.
Don't get frustrated, Kofi. They're going to get him. Just as they say, justice move very slowly, but it will be swiftly. Believe
I hope so.
Yes. As Martin Luther King says, the wheel to justice turns very slowly, but eventually we will get there. Yes, he will be indicted. I think he will be indicted by Fani Willis down in Georgia. And yes, the Department of Justice is going to go after him too, because of the fact that he was behind the January 6th insurrection. It wasn't a riot. It was an insurrection that was an overthrow of government. And Alvin Bragg he's moving slowly. I think from my understanding is that he's trying to interview more witnesses and stuff. But yes, he's going to go after Donald Trump. He's not afraid of Donald Trump. Believe me, he's not. So y'all just be patient. He is going to go after Donald Trump. Believe me, they're all going to go after Donald Trump. He's not going to know what's happening to him when they go after him. Yes, they hadn't done anything yet, but yes, they are going to get it. He's done enough to hang himself.
I mean, we all know that. It's just a matter of seeing it come to fruition. And the whole like tweeting thing, like and Twitter, I feel like Twitter at some point is going to be the end of him, because the tweeting is just like his little dog whistle to his people. Hey, come out, you little crazies, and let's try to make this not happen. So for me, it's just him attempting to get his way. But
if you know Donald Trump, I mean, I've been knowing Donald Trump now since the Central Park 5, and you know how long ago that was. He put an ad in the paper that they should have been executed, and they weren't the ones that actually attacked that lady. It was someone else. They finally caught the guy, but he had destroyed 5 teenagers' lives, and he's been a crook all his life. He's discriminated against Black people. I don't know if you all knew about that. Nixon went after him in '69 when him and his father had rental property. In order for him to identify Black people, they would put a little C on the application and all that kind of stuff. So he's been a crook all his life, just like his father. And yes, they're going to go after him. And don't worry, I'll be glad when they do. It's enough. I've had enough of Donald Trump. He's been around too long, and he's doing a lot of things that other people cannot get away with, like you and I, everyday people. There's 2 types of justice. One for people like him and rich folks, and one for everyday folks like us. And that's where we need to step in and make sure that these things, like what's going on now, that there's only one justice system.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to fight.
We got to keep it moving.
Okay.
We do need to mention, unfortunately, just today there was another school shooting, and it seems like every time we have this program, we have there's something like this. There's some kind of mass shooting that we're the country is experiencing, and it's become almost like routine at this point. And it's I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. Obviously nothing is going to get done legally that's going to stop this. I'm not really sure how you shift the culture when something like this has become so ingrained in our culture. And it I don't know. I'm really at a loss for words, lost for ideas. So I don't know if you guys have any
Yeah,
additional
I think
thoughts.
often we hear thoughts and prayers, and as much as we do offer thoughts and prayers to the families of those lost, thoughts and prayers are not enough. The Bible says faith without works is dead, and we have to, like, just like we were speaking about earlier, like we have to make the noise, we have to make the change, because at the end of the day, we say all the time that we don't know why this is, or we don't say, but it is said often that we don't know why this is happening, we don't know how to fix this, but we're the only nation in the world that has this issue. We look at the United Kingdom, we look at Australia, we look at Japan, and we look at when they had a mass shooting and how their government immediately responded by banning access to weapons and how that was an effective strategy. So we were talking about it a little bit before we got on live, but we get so caught up in this Second Amendment gun crazy American culture. But we have to recognize that as much as people are the problem, guns are the problem. And until we address access to guns, these tragedies will continue to happen and continue to happen and continue to happen. So while these politicians offer their thoughts and prayers, y'all can keep them. Because at the end of the day, until you make a change, your thoughts and prayers mean nothing.
Yeah, and things like this, particularly when it's at a school where the kids are so young, kids as young as pre-K, and my son's in third grade. So for me, this hits a lot closer to home, even though it's in Nashville. It still hits a lot closer to home, just like the Uvalde shooting, because I have a child that age, that's in that age range, and that could have been his school. Fortunately, they have things in place at his school. I feel, really pretty safe with sending him to school, but it's still disheartening that children have died. Too many children have died. One is too many, but and you look at I'm losing the initial one in Connecticut.
Oh, you talking about
No,
Aurora, Colorado.
but the one with the little
Sandy
kid.
Hook.
Sandy
Oh,
Hook.
you talking about
So you look
Sandy
at
Hook.
Sandy Hook, and then you look at Uvalde. Like, this is dozens of children who have died with by assault rifle. Like an
And just to
assault.
put that in perspective, Sandy Hook, I was in elementary school. I'm a sophomore in college now, and we're still having
Wow.
these same discussions. I was in elementary school when Sandy Hook happened.
Right.
Like,
So you have, like,
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
yeah.
And so we we have to do better as a nation. And we say it all the time. We have to make our voices heard, and we have to do all those things. But sometimes it's just frustrating because it doesn't feel like those things are enough. So that's just kind of my 2 cents.
So I was reading this book. I actually just finished it today. Called "The Second." Is about the Second Amendment. Um, it's just related to this discussion. It's not a solution for any of this, but it's about the evolution of the Second Amendment. And I actually learned some, like, interestingly enough, you hear the whole narrative behind the Second Amendment is that it was put in place for citizens to be able to protect themselves against government tyranny, right? Like, that is like the narrative that's put out there.
Right.
But it actually was put in place so that white Southerners could protect themselves against Black people.
Mm.
Like, that was the militia. Militias were formed originally to protect themselves against Black revolts. And so, like, that's why it was a compromise that was put in the Constitution to make sure that they were still allowed to arm themselves, because they were constantly living in fear of Black people getting weapons, or arming themselves. And so when the right was put into place, it didn't ever actually apply to Black people. And so at every point where Black people tried to arm themselves and use the Second Amendment as their reason for doing so, they were shut down and they were attacked by Black people. It's a real interesting book. I highly encourage anybody to check it out. But like as we're having these Second Amendment discussions, and you see, mostly white people, NRA, stuff like that, going, chanting and trying to hold firm to the Second Amendment. Understand where those roots are. Those roots were actually rooted in racism. And
everything in the Constitution was rooted in racism.
And
everything in the Constitution was rooted in racism. So don't just say the Second Amendment. The whole amendment was.
Well, that's true. That's true. But that's a part of it that I never heard before. I don't know if anybody else had heard that before, but I hadn't heard that before. And to see that like breaking down,
right.
Like I guess I'm not shocked, but it was still like interesting to hear that angle of how it came to be.
I just think it's interesting how all of I probably would be bold enough to say all of this country's ills, like all of the major issues we have, stem from racism in this country. Like literally, and I know I say it a lot on here, but like everything is because of racism. Like it all leads back to racism. And we're up here talking about guns. Racism.
Yeah.
Racism.
That's why they hate CRT so much. We can't teach that.
Right. Oh, don't teach that.
No, it's crazy. Anyway, so we that segment ran a little longer than we normally do, but I think it was really important stuff that we had to touch on. But at this point, I'm gonna kick it over to Rashina to kick off the main part of our program this evening.
So as you guys have seen advertised, we are talking about the attack on democracy tonight, and we're going to try to cover as many facets as we can. But I want to start our major talking point is about the majority minority, which stems from an article that we shared amongst ourselves, talking about the fact that America could possibly be a minority. Be a country where the minority would be the majority. So the majority of non-white people would be the majority in the country. So just to give a little background, I'll just read a little excerpt from the article. It says, some demographers believe within a generation, the United States will inevitably become a majority minority nation, with non-white people outnumbering white people. In the minds of Americans, this ethno-racial transition betokens political, cultural, and social upheaval because a white majority has dominated the nation since its founding. There has been increasing diversity in America, but also in individual families. Nearly 3 in 10 Asian, 1 in 4 Latino, and 1 in 5 Black newlyweds are married to a member of a different ethnic or racial group. More than 3/4 of these unions are with a white partner. So that's to kind of give you just a little background on where this is stemming from and why people are kind of in an uproar about this replacement theory. So just to kick off our discussion tonight and kind of keep it rooted in this majority minority idea, what impact do you guys foresee being a majority minority led nation with? What do you think that would have on our politics here in America? Or what type of impact do you foresee it having, if any?
Well, I think we already are seeing that impact personally. So I think there's always been that fear, but I think starting with the election of Obama, I think that was when a lot of these people who really held that fear closely started seeing, well, oh, here we go. Like this is the result of of white people not becoming, as dominant in the politics, right? So even if they weren't even though they still are the majority and still were the majority at the time, I think they saw the politics shifting to embrace values and elected officials who didn't look like them, and that was new, right? And I think that really stoked a lot of fear, and all those underlying feelings started to come out, and it just kept going until it kind of manifests itself into the Trump administration, where you really started seeing them, like he gave all the dog whistles and blow horns and everything that you could imagine to really feed into that fear, and take it and to leverage that not only for his rise, but to keep things, to keep that momentum going for that side.
Yeah, and there's a notion, I don't know if you all heard of the power threat theory, but that's when the majority perceives a threat to its hold on economic, political, cultural resources when a minority group size increases. And the result of that is that the majority responds to these status threats by creating or tightening state control in racialized ways. One example of that is immigration, really intensifying immigration laws. So that was one thing that I picked up on.
No, I think that's interesting because that they feel like they've run this country for centuries, and the idea, and of course it's based on the idea that the government is supposed to be for the people, by the people, and should reflect the people of this nation. And our current government has never really reflected our nation. And so the idea of them being afraid or threatened by having to relinquish that power, I think is oxymoronic, because they love to try to uphold these traditional ideals, but they don't really want to, as long as it's working in their favor. I think how they view it.
Yeah, I think definitely there's another side of it that I definitely have found interesting, especially through like looking through history, is like the battling inclusivity and exclusivity of whiteness. Like historically, whiteness was very exclusive and didn't include people groups that today are very clearly white, like Irish, like Italian. And throughout history, as the power balance has been threatened, certain groups have been incorporated into this idea of being white. And I think we're seeing that happen with the increase of this like white passing and getting rid of these categorizations of like biracial and I'm mixed and I'm this and I'm that. But a lot of these are moving towards accepting people who 125 years ago would not have at all been considered white, being considered now white, because whiteness is threatened with this. They say in a generation we could be a majority minority country. That's scary to the people in power and to the powers that be. So they have to expand their power base. And one way that I think they're looking at expanding that power base is through opening up that threshold a little bit further, so their numbers can be inflated. Another side of that, we talked about this when we had the episode about abortion. But one of the big talking points was that this was one of the biggest wins for white life, and restricting access to abortions was in part to help with the same issue of we need white babies, so we need as many as possible. So they're doing this through all these different avenues. And as we were talking about earlier, like we have to remember how everything is connected and just be cognizant of what's happening and what's behind it. Because sometimes the evil that we see might not be what we think it is.
I agree, certainly. So my next question is why, and maybe we kind of touched on this a little bit, but why do you feel this right here is such a hot button topic? We talked about how
Hello?
people feel threatened.
From United on the line. You need to, I'm emergent in.
We talked about how people feel the threat of their power being taken. But anything else that you think like makes this really a sensitive subject for those who hold the power?
I think definitely there's a lot of willful ignorance that we see, and especially with these populations that don't recognize, like we talk about having conversations about reconciliation, about white privilege, about implicit bias. All of these things are people in power not recognizing that they're in power, and how them being in power influences how they navigate in the world. And these conversations are uncomfortable to certain groups of people because it requires, like, the first step of having this conversation, it requires you to accept that there's a power balance in this nation, and that certain people are at the top and certain people are at the bottom. And being able to move past, we talk about a lot like color blindness, and I don't see race, but moving past that color blindness, moving past that willful ignorance, and being able to step into that uncomfortability and recognize that, like, yeah, because of the way I was born, like, I'm a man. I recognize that in my manness, I have inherent misogyny based upon how I've been socialized through society. So being able to deconstruct that inherent misogyny and move forward towards feminism is difficult, but you have to take that first step and be able to step into that uncomfortability. So as a white person in America, you have to step into your implicit racism and recognize the power balance so we can move towards remedying that and move towards these solutions. So I think that's part of the reason why these conversations are so uncomfortable for certain populations, without a doubt.
So,
Absolutely.
so if I could, so one of the things or concepts that came out of the article that I thought was interesting, and an article for those who want to read it themselves, is called "The Myth of a Majority Minority America," and it's published in the Atlantic in 2021. So it's not a new article, but I think it still very rings true today. But one of the themes that came out of that article was really challenging the notion of race, right? And really challenging what I think we've all kind of learned to adapt to, which was like the one drop rule, right? So like it's either you're white, pure white, or if you have one drop of anything else, one drop of black, you're black. One drop of, I don't know. Does this apply to other races too? Like, if you like
No, just black
Asian
people,
and
just
half
African
white,
Americans.
are you Asian?
She said just African American.
No, it's just African Americans. Only drop rule. Remember, they weren't even in this country when they came up with the one drop rule.
So
That was because folks down in New
bring up
Orleans.
an interesting question though. So like, what do people who are half, say, Spanish or Asian or whatever and white call themselves? Like, are they?
They're
I think,
biracial.
I
They
think a
refer
lot of
to
the time,
multiracial.
right, they claim that they're mixed or they're white and Asian.
Or
Like,
sometimes
whereas
they
someone
pick,
that's
right?
white and black often will just say, I'm black.
Right.
That's interesting though, right? But I think the article really challenges that, right? And to say, well, okay, if all of these, it's not just like over this majority minority shift isn't just because there are just more black people or more Hispanic people or whatever. Like it's also saying that there's more mixed people, and so like and a lot of these mixed people are kind of move fluidly between different cultures. Sometimes depending on where they are, if they're in a white community, they may go as white, and so they're blending into white culture, or if they're not, then they're blending it, so it really depends on where they sit personally. And so the notion is that they're challenging the idea that white people should be afraid because they're really in some ways kind of culturally growing their own numbers in a way, right? If you want to look at, but it depends on how you categorize whiteness. So it really gets to like a fundamental question of like, what is white, what is black, what is all these things. And I'll shut up in a second, but I someone who wasn't born in America, right? Myself, like I grew up in the Caribbean. The notion of black and white, that didn't really resonate with me until I came here, right? And a lot of immigrants, like Chinese people don't call themselves Asian in China, right? Like you're only Asian when you come to America, So like a lot of the racial constructs that we think about, like Africans, they don't call themselves black in Africa because everybody's black, right? So like this is a really Americanized thing that we're living under. So like as we start to blend these things more and more, you could easily see how 30, 40 years from now, like it's just confusing, you know? I don't know.
No, I think you make an excellent point, but it also highlights how ridiculous the notion of race actually is from the jump. Like you try to use it to categorize or um, put people in different
Yeah,
tiers and different
like a
levels.
caste system.
Right. And so now that we trying to get it all sorted out, and you're like, um, well, how do you define it? How do you nobody knows how to define it?
Right.
Nobody really, when you get down to it, like you really don't know how to define it because you're defining people by a phenotype, like by literally
Mhm.
by what they look like. And so, I can say, oh, look, Kofi is an African American, but are you?
Yeah.
Are you? Or are you a Caribbean American?
If I get pulled over, I am.
But to that point, we also have to think how we as people of color, we have to also, even though we're not big on race, but we have to make it about that so we can teach our children how this is how the world sees you. And
Right.
so
Right.
it kind of go back to, yes, you're black, you're considered black, or whatever, and have the talk and all of those things because of how society views people of
Mhm.
color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like was somebody else about to jump in? I don't want to dominate the conversation. I don't know if anybody else had a thought. Well, I was gonna say like so it's like race isn't real, but it also is real.
Right.
You know, it's real in how people treat you. It's real in how our society is structured. But at the same time, it's not. You know, like this whole concept is really just a social construct
Hmm.
that was built on white supremacy. And so it's like you're either white or you're something else, and then your white is at the top. But in a way, like you want to challenge that and challenge that notion, but at the same time, you have to also deal with reality of this is the world we live in.
Right.
You know,
Mhm.
and so it is definitely a struggle that's going to continue to get more and more complicated as the time goes on.
Right.
And
But
as we spoke about earlier, the first step of breaking down these barriers, deconstructing this idea of race and racism and these type of things in our nation is that thing that we're currently fighting against, this idea of CRT, this idea of everything is related to racism, and we have to deconstruct the racism to deconstruct the inequities. And we talked about earlier, like that's the big reason behind why these things can't be taught in schools, why these things can't be posted about, why these things can't be supported by government agencies. They don't want CRT and diversity and equity and inclusion and all of those different categories and ideas to be put out there, because the more that we investigate the ideas, the more we investigate the systems of oppression that exist around us and how we can change. And why give the people the tools to enact change when the power system benefits them really well right now?
Mhm.
absolutely, I mean, it's like they when you read about it and you research, um, the education system in America is designed to kind of keep people thinking and keep all of us thinking and believing one way. This is why they want to control the textbooks. This is why they leave certain things out of the textbooks. So, as Jaden said, we have to um, push forward because, again, things like that, trying to ban critical race theory is a threat to our democracy. Ultimately, it all goes back to race.
Yeah. Critical race theory
Yeah.
is not really taught in any school. It's only taught at the graduate level, and that's only taught at law school. So if you're not in law school, you're not going to get this critical race theory. And that's why they bring up these dog whistles like CRT and woke and all this other stuff, is because, like you say, it's basically dog whistles. But I do think that a lot of things are changing because a lot of schools are incorporating African American history into their curriculum. So we kudos, to some school districts. I know Fairfax County is going to be teaching, I think, in this upcoming school year, and there's other schools that are already teaching it already. So, they may try to stop it, but they're not gonna be able to do that because more kids are gonna want to have it, and they're gonna fight for it because kids are fighting for it. Not only Black kids, but white kids are fighting for it too. So, they want to be taught the real history.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to be stupid. Only people in America are stupid about their own history. I mean, because other countries know about African American history. They've studied, and they can regurgitate you what your history is. And you can't even tell them what your history is. You live in America.
And again, it goes back to being engaged in local politics. Like it's local school boards who are making these decisions. It's state school boards who are making these decisions. So being in those rooms, being in those meetings when they create the standards, being in those meetings when they're trying to ban classroom
Right.
materials, standing up and making our voices heard. Because I remember right around election time last year, one of the most effective campaigns I saw on A&T's campus was it was a picture of two old white people, and it said, "They're voting. Are you?" They will be there. They will be there arguing why the book by the Black author or by the queer author or by the Asian author, by the Muslim author can't be put in the classroom. But if we're not here standing up for diversity, if we're not standing up for equity, if we're not standing up for accurate history, if we're not standing up for deconstructing racism in math and English and every subject, then who is fighting against those who are blaming everything on CRT? We looked at the textbooks that didn't get approved by Ron DeSantis. There were like hundreds of math textbooks that got stopped because of CRT. How is an addition textbook practicing critical race theory? But the problem is we aren't there standing up against it, and we have to.
Yeah, they're taking out, I don't know if you all know, but they're taking out the race of Rosa Parks in the school books in Florida. And in addition to that, I think they were going to show a movie about Ruby Bridges, and they stopped that about the 6-year-old little girl that integrated the schools down in New Orleans. I mean, this was a 6-year-old child,
Right.
going to school with all these policemen surrounded by her and all these racist white people calling her names and things. And I often, me and my daughter often talk, how did she feel? If these white kids feel the way they feel, how did they think this 6-year-old little Black girl felt when she had to go to school, to this integrated school by herself? I know she had to be frightened, but, they don't see it that way. They only see it one way, and that's their way or no way. And like I say, these kids need to learn the truth. And I think most of them do want to know the truth. It's not like my daughter and I say, it's not the kids, it's the parents don't want them to know the truth. So, it's not the kids, it's the parents. So we have to look at the parent, who these parents of these kids are, because, with this Parents' Bill of Rights that, and you all say I'm getting political, but of course, Congress passed a Parents' Bill of Rights. You know what that is, right? I hope everybody knows what it is. But anyway, it's because of the parents in Loudoun County was criticizing about, kids, about what was being taught in school and stuff. So it's all based on Loudoun County. But like I say, it's the parent, and the parents don't want them to know how bad they were in life and how their parents and grandparents and everything else was slaves and all this other stuff. Because like I say, these people have some of these things in their background. If they actually research their background, they will find that some of them had slaves and they have cousins that are African American. So, those are things that, these kids want to learn things. People want to know things. They don't want to be ignorant. Right. And you don't want people to be ignorant. You want them to be knowledgeable.
No, that kind of, I guess in that same vein of making sure that we're educating ourselves, one interesting thing that I kind of stumbled upon this week was how bills get backing, or how they get how legislation kind of gets passed in this country, and how things like bans on critical race theory, or textbook bans and things, abortion rights, all of those things really stem from like special interest groups, political action committees, lobbies, and people are funneling money into these organizations and that many of these Congress members kind of, hobnob with, because they're giving the Congress people money, donating campaigns and all of those things. So for me, I guess the question is, how do we, the people who are trying to operate within a government who is supposed to be by the people for the people, how do we navigate trying to fight that from the ground when we know there's backdoor politics going on in our
You
government?
have to get rid of gerrymandering. That's the problem in this country. If you look at some of these states and everything, it's so gerrymandered. Like where my daughter lives in Georgia, they knew the demographics was changing in the Atlanta metro area, and it was moving more Democratic. So what the Republican government did, what the Republicans did, they gerrymandered so many districts to dilute the Black vote so they could stay in power. And those are the things that we've got to work on to make sure that that stops, because that's why we can't get things done, is because things are so gerrymandered in some states. I don't think it's gerrymandered in Virginia, but I know it's gerrymandered in the South mainly, probably, and across the Western states too.
Right, and that's an issue
That's
that
the
we
real.
have.
That's the crux of the problem, is gerrymandering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so
there was A&T where they split the campus right down the middle in between two
Really?
North Carolina high schools, right down the
In
middle
North
of campus,
Carolina?
right in Greensboro, right in the middle of campus, right down the street in the middle of North Carolina A&T's campus.
Wow.
Or if you stayed on the south side, you were voting in one district, and if you stayed on the north side, you were voting in a different district, because the Black vote is just too powerful.
Right, exactly.
And the reason why it's no longer like that is because of student activism and community engagement and involvement in local politics. So again, we have the power to fight back. So it's about taking our power and using it.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so the issue of gerrymandering is really complicated, and yes, we know that it's hard. It's easier to say what wrong looks like than to say what right looks like. And I'm just trying to be objective here. When it comes to drawing political boundaries, we have to remember they are political boundaries. There's politics that's inherently built into the process of drawing boundaries. Whether that's the boundary of the United States, whether it's the boundary of a state, whether it's the boundary of a district, it's all politics that drove those little invisible lines that we live in, right? So yes, gerrymandering is a problem, but it's harder to say when it's like blatant. It's easier to point it out when it's like blatantly wrong than it is to say, well, because even there's disagreement as to like, okay, well, let's say you have a Black community, right? Do you want all the Black community into one district, or do you want to split that in half between two districts? Does splitting it in half actually reduce the power or the voice of that community, or would it be better served if they had dominance in one district, right? So these are questions that kind of look differently depending on where you go. So it's not an easy thing. I'm not suggesting that gerrymandering isn't real. I'm just saying, like, the actual, when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, it's a very difficult, complicated discussion. But it is real. I mean, I think so. Going back to our original point about how the shifting demographics is making our democracy kind of watered down. I feel like this is one of those areas where I think it serves as a reminder that our democracy never really was pure, right? From its founding to now, it's always been a little bit of a myth of representation. Even all the way up to the presidential election, we have the Electoral College, where that's not, each individual vote doesn't exactly count, right? Because the Electoral College ultimately makes a decision, and that looks different depending on which state you live in. So I think with these shifting demographics questions, I think we're going to see a lot more of gerrymandering. I think we're going to see a lot more of voter suppression. I think we're going to see making things harder to vote, because I think what ultimately comes down to is that it's kind of a fundamental question of, do people really want democracy, or do they just want what they want? right? And I think incidents like January 6th actually, to me, tell me that they just want what they want, right? I think a lot of people like to hide behind this notion that January 6th only happened because all these people believed in the big lie. I think they knew that darn well that they lost the election. They just didn't like the outcome. But that's what democracy gets you. So if looking ahead, as we, just tying up into the discussion about the demographics, if looking ahead, democracy isn't going to give you the same results that it did 50 years ago, the white majority, white dominating politics, I think we might see more and more efforts to undermine democracy even further.
Oh yeah, that's already happening. That's already taken place. I mean, look at Jaden. He's in North Carolina. The way they made changes to the rules. Supreme Court stated that they had gerrymandered North Carolina so badly, even Justice Thomas had to say it was gerrymandered very badly. And now the Republicans are back in control in the state Supreme Court, and they're making a lot more changes to regress the state backwards, which is, that's why I say people have got to get out there and vote. You got to vote. If you don't vote, this is what we get. And like I say, there's a lot of Black people that didn't get out and vote this last election. And it could have changed our federal senators. We could have had 53 senators instead of 51, or 54 senators instead of 51, which could have changed the whole dynamics of the U.S. Senate. And then in North Carolina, if that Black lady had won,
but D, can I play devil's advocate for you for a minute? So
yeah.
to the Black people or whoever, right? Like let's say Black for the sake of this discussion, who don't vote, but like don't vote intentionally because they are upset about, pick your issue, right? About how Black people are treated. Let's say police brutality, right? So right here in Fairfax, we have a so-called progressive Democrat controlled board of supervisors who appointed a police chief that was accused of doing some pretty horrible things to Black people in the past. And we see it playing out again right now, and they're doing nothing about it, right? So they used the democratic process. We voted, and this is what we get, right? And so the answer can't always be, well, you need to vote again. Some people, I'm not advocating for this or nothing, but some people who look at these situations like this, look at the failure of the George Floyd Policing Act in Congress, and things like that, and make a conscious decision out of protest to not vote. I think there are a lot of people who like that, and I think that actually not voting can be your way of expressing yourself, because your two choices that you have are sometimes you kind of know what you're going to get. Right. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying I'm not going to personally criticize people who make a conscientious decision, who are well informed and make a conscious decision not to, out of protest. That's just my opinion on that.
But sometimes, Kofi, people don't vote. There's a lot of reasons why people don't vote. Not only because of what you just stated. People may be working 3 jobs. They don't have time to vote. And that's why I would like to see, and I've signed a petition for this, to have a national election day where everybody be off and they have the opportunity to vote, where people can be paid for their jobs, and they can actually get out there and vote if they want to vote. So I don't know if you've seen that petition been going around, but there has been a petition going around talking about having a election day as a national, like in think of Australia, and in some countries you have to vote. If you don't vote, like in France, if you don't vote, you get arrested. So
I don't believe in that at all. But
yeah, I know you don't believe in that, but I do think we should have a national election in this country. I really do.
Yeah,
as well as
give people the opportunity, if they want to vote, they can get out and vote.
It would certainly be helpful. We've come to the end of our time today. Is there anything else anyone would like to add for the sake of discussion before we call it a night?
Good conversation.
Thank you so much. It was great having you here. Thank you all for tuning in and hanging in there with us and viewing this broadcast tonight. We will be back again next month. Do we know the topic for next month, Kofi?
You put me on the spot. I do not.
Don't remember.
But it'll be
I'm
good.
sure there'll be something new and interesting to come up.
Absolutely. So we will be back here again next month. Tell a friend to tell a friend that we will be here at 7 p.m. on the fourth Monday night. And we hope to see you all there. And Stephanie, hi, Stephanie. I do want to put her question up. She says, who are you hurting but yourself if you don't vote? I'm sure many politicians welcome people protesting their right to vote. Well,
I hear you, Stephanie.
That's a true statement.
that is. But
It's just what I just said.
Yes.
She confirmed it.
That's why we all have our opinions here. But thank you guys again so much for tuning in, and we will see you back next month. Good night.
Good night. Have a good
Good night,
week,
y'all.
everybody. Have a blessed week.
Bye-bye.